shining a light on the issues that matter most.
Miss USA Noelia Voigt is stepping down.
She says she's resigning so she can focus on her mental health.
From life after gun violence.
It just really it really broke us. It really did.
To the struggles with maintaining mental clarity.
There are many different factors that add to why a person may become violent or not, and mental illness may just be one factor.
And the struggle to address the ripple effects that prevent us from truly starting the process to heal.
It's a bunch of collateral consequences. So when you're in that situation and trying to reintegrate, it's like you're thrown into a foreign world.
Tonight, we're digging into the root causes of trauma and how mental health struggles can manifest in different ways. This is The Silent Struggle. And we thank you for joining us tonight for our special town hall conversation, The Silent Struggle. I'm Joel Brown. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and Eyewitness News is committed to helping reduce the stigma surrounding mental health conditions. And over the next hour, we're going to have a conversation about the root causes of mental illness, how it manifests in different ways and in different communities. And most important, the resources and tools available, both new and old, to help people recover and live more fulfilling lives. We've assembled an incredible panel for our talk. We have Raleigh psychiatrist Dr. Nerissa Price. Mark Simon is executive director of NAMI of Wake County. And we have Dr. Mary Wise, an expert in child trauma and family well-being. And we also have Kerwin Pittman and Debbie Morales. Pittman is executive director of REPS, which stands for Recidivism Reduction Education Program Services, working to help people on their journey after incarceration. You'll hear how trauma can sometimes stand in the way of people trying to turn their lives around. And there's Dr. Morales. She is a mother who lost her son in a deadly shooting. She will discuss the trauma of gun violence and her journey to healing. Kerwin and Dr. Debbie, stand by for us. We've also got Steve Daniels here with us throughout the hour. Steve, let's begin with you and the current struggle of mental health around the nation.
Hi, Joel. Thanks. Yeah, let's paint a picture of mental illness across the country. This is from NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And according to the latest numbers from 2021, 22% of all adults, that's 1 out of 5, experience mental illness. So that is a total of 57.8 million people across the country. And 14.1 million adults experience serious mental illness. That's 1 out of 20 adults. And let's take a look at this. In younger people, 1 in 6 between the ages of 6 and 17 experience a mental health disorder every year. The impact of mental illness is concerning because 90% of people who die by suicide may have experienced symptoms of mental illness. And let's dive deeper in this here, because among young people, suicide is the second leading cause of death. And among people who identify as LGBTQ, they are nearly 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than straight young people. In the general population, men account for 79% of people who die by suicide. And we have more data to share on mental illness and the impact. Coming up, we'll take a look at some of the barriers that stand in the way of people getting care and how North Carolina ranks on that list, Joel.
Steve's going to stay close. We'll see more of him throughout the hour. Steve, thank you. Let's get into our panel discussion. Dr. Nerissa Price, let's start with you. You heard the numbers. More than 57 million people struggling with their mental health right now. Big question, why?
So there are a lot of reasons why we're seeing more mental illness, and we have to recognize that it's complex, that we have factors related to families or biological issues, but also our exposure. You know, you think about how much violence that we are more and more exposed to, which makes the risk of having traumatic experiences higher, and it increases the risk of mental illness as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why we may be seeing more.
You talk about causation, Dr. Wise. What do you think is causing this crisis for so many?
I think Dr. Price said it really well. It's complex. There's so many different factors. We're just coming out of a pandemic that's unlike anything that in recent generations we've experienced. We've also got additional things happening in our world, increase in substance use that affects many families across North Carolina. And all of these factors coming together yield challenges.
Yeah, huge challenges. Mark Simon, you are the director, executive director of the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in Wake County. What's NAMI seeing?
You know, NAMI is, we bridge the gap between someone experiencing that first mental health symptom and receiving the professional care. So our knowledge of it is kind of tapping into being boots on the ground. So drawing from our helpline, which is a resource that anyone in Wake County can contact via phone or a web form. And we've experienced a significant increase in call volume this year. And the types of issues that people are asking for help for are complex, like you mentioned earlier. The number one thing people are looking for is just support. There's still a lot of stigma, and so people are looking for a non-judgmental way to ask for help, because there's a lot of avenues you can go. People feel judged. Additionally, people are just looking to learn from other people who have experienced this before. What are best practices? How do you navigate a complex mental health system? And another resource that we're finding a lot of people asking for is housing. A lot of people know there's a housing crisis, and sometimes it's focused on visible disabilities, people that need accessible accommodations, but there's also the invisible disabilities. Someone may look like they're able to work full time, but they may have a mental health challenge that prevents them from earning an income that they can afford housing. So we're getting a lot of calls about that as well. And just speaking anecdotally, we're noticing a lot of people are calling about young males 20 to 30 years of age who are having a hard time transitioning from home to living independently.
Interesting stuff. Dr. Price, look, I know it's complex. I know mental illness, mental health struggles can look different in different people, but can you paint a picture of what mental health struggle looks like?
Yeah, so it can look like different things for different folks, as you mentioned, but at the base is what we look for are difficulty in functioning in one's life, maybe not meeting our full potential. There may be signs and symptoms there that might be red flags that there's a mental health condition. We want to look at things like changes in behavior or changes in mood that, again, may not change despite a person's greatest effort to try to make some improvements in their life, and they may feel stuck, in fact. And then certainly if we see individuals that are feeling so hopeless to the point that they are having suicidal thoughts or thoughts that life may not be worth living, that's always a big red flag that there may be a mental health condition. Okay, I want to widen out the conversation, Dr. Wise, and talk about social media and its impact on young people specifically. Sure. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, 95% of young people use social media, and they're spending over 3 hours every day on it, and they're facing twice the risk of having negative mental health outcomes. Let's discuss what you're seeing when it comes to the impact of social media on young people.
Yeah. I think we see a variety of ways that it impacts different children depending on their age, depending on their families and the cultural groups they come from, and expectations about use of social media, expectations about ways of relating. My work is primarily with much younger children who have less social media exposure. So we see this more with sort of older teens.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you seeing, Dr. Price? You're a child psychiatrist.
So I'm especially seeing children that are already vulnerable, who may have an underlying mental health condition being affected by social media, or adolescent females that really impacting their self-esteem, their body image. It's really actually quite scary what may be happening to our young people and their exposure to social media. But here's the other thing. There is some good to social media as well. There's certain marginalized groups that I've seen, particularly our LGBTQ community, where being able to reach out to talk to folks that are like them and that they can get those resources that, in fact, social media can be a positive thing.
Sure, lots of benefits for social media. I don't want to paint this in a total negative picture here, but on teenagers, on a young mind, there is the threat of overstimulation. Some researchers think social media can overstimulate the brain's reward system, and that can trigger pathways that can look and feel a lot like addiction. Yes?
Sure. Well, especially when you're hearing that children are spending way more than just 3 hours even a day, and that, we talk about like the anecdote of of young people sitting next to each other, but everyone has the phone that they're looking at, as opposed to really interacting with one another. And you do have to wonder, what's that doing? Certainly with the quality of their social interactions, but what's that really, what is that going to mean for our society in the future?
Any tips for parents, Dr. Weiss?
Lots of conversation with kids, absolutely. Talking about social media use, looking at their social media, talking with them about other people's social media use, and just keeping questions really open. You know, when a child talks about someone else's posts, asking, yeah, what do you think of that? Like, how do you feel about that?
Conversation. We're going to do that. Next on The Silent Struggle, we're going to dive into the trauma from gun violence in the road to healing. Kerwin Pittman and Debbie Morales joining our conversation next. We'll hear about the healing process after a traumatic event and the work to break the cycle of violence. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Back now with The Silent Struggle. Since the 1960s, the number of Americans killed by guns has steadily increased, from suicides to murders, and these incidents are having a devastating impact on communities across the country. We're going to bring in the rest of our panel to continue the discussion, but first, Debbie Morales, good to see you again. You and I talked this week about your son, your family, and the trauma of gun violence. Let's watch this piece and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So how is your mental health space now?
It's in a good place.
It's been nearly 8 years since Debbie Morales' life was rocked by gun violence.
We are following in Fayetteville 2 people there fatally shot on Southwood Drive.
Her 29-year-old son, Derek McLean, an aspiring musician, one of 2 victims shot and killed in a hail of bullets outside of a Fayetteville apartment complex in August 2016.
It just hurt me to my core because stuff like this doesn't happen to our family.
Detectives telling Debbie Derek's friend had been set up by enemies, her son caught in the crossfire.
He told me basically my son was a casualty. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mental health experts agree losing a loved one to gun violence sparks intense emotion. Not just grief, but anger. Debbie talked about the initial rage she felt toward her son's killers.
I was really, really angry. Didn't want to have anything to do with them. Actually, to be quite frank, I just wanted them to die. It just really it really broke us. It really did. And I had a hard time.
Debbie said her road to mental health healing was aided by her faith, clinical therapy, and support groups. And when she testified at the sentencing hearing for the young man who murdered her son, something amazing happened. You're looking into the eyes of the men who shot and killed your son, and you said what?
I told him I forgive him. I told him I didn't realize I was going to forgive him until just now. I would give my life if I could to bring my son back, but I know I can't. So I want them to be productive citizens.
Debbie Morales joining us here. Debbie, we talked about the intense emotions that gun violence can have on one's mental health. There's fear, and oftentimes there is anger, and you felt that.
Oh, yes. Yes, I was definitely angry. It was very overwhelming. The anger was intense to the point where even when I sat in a chair and I was silent, the rage was just so bad that just to live was a struggle. I had a hard time. I wanted these young men to not be here anymore. As bad as that sound, I was hurt. And it's to lose a child is a struggle, and it does something to your mind. My words, my dreams, my thoughts, it created a whole different condition of my life. It just took power over me that I never thought could ever happen. So I see how people can get into mental anguish really quickly. And it took me for a long time. It was kind of like the hidden me. I was real silent.
Hidden you.
I was silent. So people would see me. I'm real big in our church, and they would see me functioning, but I wasn't. I would get in my car and I'd scream.
People see you in public and say, Debbie's fine. She's okay. Look how she's dealing with this.
Exactly.
And that wasn't. You weren't you weren't okay at all.
No, I wasn't okay at all.
Your husband's a pastor. I know you. Look, you're a woman of faith. Your husband's a pastor. You have a big church life. But mental health and therapy, and was also had a big part in your healing.
It was. My husband's one of the ministers at our church, and he couldn't even help me. I was angry. I was angry with God. And who dares be angry with God? But I was angry. I was mad. I was hurt. And I didn't even want my husband to see how bad it was, because I didn't want him to think I was broken, even though I was broken. I was really broken. To the point one day he came in there, and I was broke down crying so bad that he said, you know, we got to do something. It was pretty bad. Thank God I have spiritual advisors at my church that were able to help me and kind of guide me and talk me into getting some help and talking to the right people, because that's the key too. You have to talk to the right people. And just kind of, some of it I had to deal with myself. Yeah. Because I knew better, and I knew the power of words, and I knew it was destroying me.
Yeah, and you found the other side.
So I had to be more positive. I had to be more positive. I had to look into more things. I started researching. I started studying stuff. I started reading about these two young men. I started doing a lot of soul searching, and then I started finding myself feeling sorry for these boys that killed my son. Yeah. And I was able to write a letter to them, and then I was able to forgive them in court.
Forgiving them on the stand and saying that. It sounds like it was empowering. I want to come back to you in a second, and Kerwin, I'm going to get to you in a second as well, but let me open it up to Dr. Price and Dr. Wise as we're hearing Debbie's story here. She lost her 26-year-old son. It's been nearly 8 years, and it's an amazing story of healing. But people impacted by gun violence, there's science behind this trauma that she's detailing. What is that?
Well, you know, I think it's important to say that trauma affects everybody differently. Yeah. So it may look differently. But really, it triggers a lot of our biological functioning. It's a fight or flight, for example, that either people may experience trauma and feel like angry. So very much so, like you mentioned, that's normal for a lot of individuals. Others may experience feeling fear. So they pull away from others. Everything maybe triggers them. And then there are others who may freeze, who really may get stuck and may have a sense of numbness even. And so there are a lot of different signs of someone who's experiencing trauma. Oftentimes it is biologically mediated, and then a lot of it just depends on the personality of the person as well. And I don't think we always can anticipate how people are going to respond. So when we have this happen to someone close to us, we need to keep our eyes open and minimize our judgment.
Dr. Wise, I think about children as well, and children specifically who are growing up in areas that are more prone to violence and the impact it can have on them trauma-wise. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we see so clearly is that at different ages or different developmental stages, children, young children, school-age children, adolescents, grown-ups, that we respond in slightly different ways depending on sort of our cognitive capacity, our development, but also the relationship with people around us who are able to understand and comfort and believe and respond well.
Kerwin, I've known you for several years now. We have seen each other on all kinds of stories, and many of them have not been good. We've met at crime scenes and seen victims of gun violence and other kinds of violence very close up, often in the worst days of their lives. You can talk better than anybody about the impact of trauma left behind from that kind of violence in a community.
So the trauma left behind from violence is like a residue that just won't go away. We see a cycle of hurt people hurting people, right? And so that unprocessed trauma leads to, sadly to say, more violence. So coming here, I was thinking about when I was 15 years old, and my other 15-year-old friend got shot. And after he got shot, me seeing him get shot, he wasn't the same coming out of that. And so eventually he spiraled out of control and ended up going to prison for shooting somebody else because he said it would never happen to him again. So what I have seen is unhealed and unchecked and untreated trauma. It only leads to more hurt. And I think in particularly the Black and brown communities, it is a stigma with getting help from this trauma. And so to hear how, Debbie kind of handled her trauma and processed it and used it in a productive way for a productive cause, I applaud you. I extremely applaud you.
We all do. We'll get more into that and more into your story as well, which is super interesting, and what you have overcome in your life when the silent struggle continues. Up next, what we're seeing when it comes to mental health and incarceration. Just how many people are imprisoned and suffering from mental illness. Plus, Kerwin will tell us about a new initiative he's working on to create change. Stay with us. The silent struggle continues in our jails and prisons. Right now, you'll find people behind bars suffering from mental illness and raising big concerns about what happens when those people return to civilian life. Let's go back over to Steve for a closer look at the criminal justice system and mental health. Steve.
Joel, thanks. Yeah, I want to show you this data from NAMI. About 2 out of every 5 people incarcerated have a history of mental illness, and 3 out of 5 of them do not get mental health treatment while they are behind bars. 66% of women in prison report having a history of mental illness. That's actually nearly twice the percentage of men who are in prison. And an estimated 4,000 people with serious mental illness are held in solitary confinement in prison. And 70% of people in the juvenile justice system have a diagnosable mental health condition. And finally, about 50,000 veterans are being held in local jails, and 55% of them report experiencing mental illness. Joel.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Look, NAMI also found about 2 million times each year people with serious mental illness are booked into jails. Kerwin, let's begin with you. We are seeing how mental illness or untreated trauma can increase the chances of people being involved in the criminal justice system. Let's take a look at a piece you did about what you're doing in the community right now to try and address that. Let's look at it. We'll talk about it on the other side.
When you're in that situation and trying to reintegrate, it's like you're thrown into a foreign world.
The days and weeks after someone is released from jail or prison can be confusing, but they're crucial. In fact, in North Carolina, nearly half, 49% of people who are released will be arrested again within 2 years.
I myself being someone who had to reintegrate back into society, I understood that it was hard.
Kerwin Pittman beat the odds, serving more than a decade behind bars, and then not only turning his own life around, but helping others do the same. He founded an organization called REPS, aiming to reduce recidivism.
I'm hoping to have an impact on individuals coming home, know that they are loved, and we see them, we love them, and we care.
His latest initiative, a hotline serving all of North Carolina.
I know that real-time source of information can make or break somebody's successful reentry.
Anyone can call, probation officers, corrections staff, and especially those who are just being released and might not know what to do next. They can get help with things like getting an ID, getting connected to resources, finding a mentor, anything they might need in those pivotal moments.
Just making somebody feel like they're a whole human being when they enter back into society from being incarcerated.
Of course, the main idea is to help people avoid being in a position where they reoffend. But Kerwin knows the impact could be much bigger than that, reaching everyone in our community in one way or another.
When we give individuals second chances, everybody's safe, including the individual who needs a second chance. They have housing, they have food, they have shelter, they're safe. And so we know if everybody's safe, then we're good.
Now, with Sydney Schofield reporting, Kerwin, look, just in North Carolina, nearly half of those who are released from prison will be rearrested within 2 years. This recidivism hotline, you started about 2 weeks ago. How does it work? Is it working?
So the recidivism reduction hotline is working great. Within the first 7 days, we received over 350 calls. And so how it works is an individual will call home needing resources for reentry or services, and we'll have an operator on the other end of the line, and we'll connect them with the resources and services inside of our database, and they can call those resources and services and get help. And so it's just bridging the gap between connectivity, the people needing the services, and the actual services.
I'm not saying commercials about this thing online, but you're getting the word out there.
Getting the word out. So I'm getting the word out through a grassroots effort and campaign, through partners, through just word of mouth. People call from the prison system, actually, so meaning like staff, probation officers, People calling from other states asking, can I replicate it in their state? And so it has been a kind of a huge success so far.
Okay, but right now, these are people who might be imprisoned, incarcerated in North Carolina, who are calling you. And
their loved ones.
And their loved ones. Yeah, that makes sense.
And
moms, dads, sisters, brothers. Hey, what can you do to help?
What can you do to help? And so they're calling, they're looking for help, and we're providing them with the answers.
Dr. Price, look, we had a conversation earlier this week for a story about the trauma of gun violence, and I know a big part of it for you was digging into the root causes of violent behavior to help prevent future incidents of it. What do you mean by that?
I mean that we have to start at the very beginning, is that for a lot of these individuals, so they weren't born violent necessarily, they were exposed to violence, oftentimes very early, or they had more adverse childhood experiences or traumatic experiences early in life. They are exposed in their neighborhoods with violence. It becomes the language, actually, that a lot of people express themselves. And as I mentioned, our society in general, we become more violent. And so it almost makes you wonder, how we're surprised that our young people keep turning to violence when that's what they're exposed to, as opposed to, you think about it, it's so much easier for a young person to get a handgun than it is to get an appointment with a child psychiatrist. Yeah. That's something wrong that we've made this problem in society.
Yeah. They weren't born that way. That's something, Debbie, you said to me the other day when we talked about that amazing moment on the witness stand and forgiving the men who shot and killed your son. When you hear Kerwin talk about his recidivism reduction program, what goes through your mind?
I think it's awesome. It was a process for me to get where I'm at, but I really feel like we got to get to the root of the problem. Just like Dr. Price said, they weren't born this way, so something happened to change them. And I feel like if we can get to the root of the problem, then we can help a lot of these people, because just like she said, they can get a gun, but they can't get an appointment. That's sad. And when we have what Kerwin is doing, I think that's awesome, because if we don't be able to help them when they come back into society, then we'll have the same problem. At some point, we have to stop it.
And Mark, you studied the impact of people's employment status on their mental health. I think that plays into this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I come from a public health background, and in public health, we have these things called social determinants of health, which are non-medical factors that contribute to someone's health and well-being. And employment, particularly meaningful employment, is a key social determinant of health. And how that translates, a good job, a meaningful job, provides a good source of stability and routine. And for someone living with a mental health condition, that routine is very, very important. It certainly provides financial security, which eliminates financial stress, contributes to mental health challenges, fosters social connectedness with other people that you may work with. And I think for young people in particular, in many cases, it provides a refuge from what may be a chaotic home life, access to role models and individuals that can help them transition from this adolescence to young adulthood.
And it sounds like that plays right into what you're trying to do in connecting people with resources with the hotline. How big do you see the recidivism hotline getting?
I see it getting as big as it could possibly get. I see it getting nationally big. When other states started calling, I was kind of shocked. And I said, we're on to something here. We got something.
It's only been 2 weeks.
Only been 2 weeks.
It sounds like you're seeing a lot of success.
I'm seeing a lot of success in 2 weeks.
Next up, folks, on The Silent Struggle, we turn the focus on women and their health, the new initiative announced just yesterday by the White House. If you're just joining us on The Silent Struggle, we are having a crucially important conversation about mental health and wellness as we mark Mental Health Awareness Month. Right now, we want to discuss women and mental health and how health struggles can show up differently in different people. Earlier this month, Miss USA Noelia Voigt resigned her crown, citing her mental health. In an Instagram post, she said she realized this may come as a large shock to many. Never compromise your physical and mental well-being. Our health is our wealth. And 2 years ago, mental health in the pageant world was front and center when former Miss USA, a North Carolina native, Chesley Christ, died by suicide in 2022. The 30-year-old was an attorney and a TV correspondent. Chris's mother later detailed her daughter's struggles with depression. Before we bring back the panel, let's get back over to Steve Daniels. Steve, just yesterday, the White House announced a new initiative on maternal mental health.
Yeah, Joel, this is really startling. Our country actually has the highest maternal mortality rate among developed countries anywhere in the world. And health officials say the death of many of those women is preventable. So the Department of Health and Human Services has just outlined these 5 initiatives right here. So let's walk you through these a little more closely. The goal is to increase access to and coverage of comprehensive health services for all women, for pregnant women and new mothers. The government is also throwing more support behind a 24/7 national hotline supporting mental health and well-being. And the White House also wants to reduce the disparity in women's health care. They're going to be providing money to different communities to train healthcare professionals about how to better listen and care for all women. And the announcement builds on the continued effort to increase the quality of women's health care. In March, the First Lady Jill Biden was here in RTP announcing $200 million toward women's health research, and it'll help fund research on very important health issues impacting women, things like menopause.
When you consider that nearly 2 million women a year in the United States will transition into menopause, and we don't understand what it means for one's life trajectory and what are the things that we can do to improve health outcomes, it means a lot.
And the White House says the goal here is to ensure women aren't just an afterthought, but a first thought in our entire healthcare system, Joel.
Okay, let's dig into this, Steve. Let's talk about women and mental health. Dr. Price, we'll start with you. What are you seeing in your practice when it comes to women taking charge of their own mental health?
So what we've always seen is that women may suffer more from mental illness disproportionately than men, particularly with depression, for example, twice as likely to have depression versus men. Also anxiety, women tend to have more. But the question has always been why, you know, and, you know, certainly we know that there's biological differences between men and women, but you also have to wonder about the societal exposures and differences. What makes it harder for a woman to achieve better mental well-being? And so that's why it's very exciting to hear that there's more research and more money really geared towards answering those questions.
Yeah, this funding really being celebrated in a lot of circles. Debbie, let me turn to you. You talked about your mental health journey and your road to healing, but I'm interested in about your experience trying to seek help and how that went for you.
It was tough, and I think for women in general, we wear a lot of hats, and I think we'll have depression, but we hide it. We're so used to taking care of our spouses, our kids, work, you know, extra activities that I know me personally, I just kept busy even though I felt like I was just going to fall apart. And I think we just try to hold it up because of all the other factors. Sometimes I know I personally felt like I had to keep control of things to make things happen, but in reality I really wasn't controlling anything. I was still losing it. And I think that's what happens with a lot of us women. We do too much. We do too much, and we put a lot on ourselves, and just trying to take care of everyone and not taking care of ourselves.
And you realize that now? Yeah. Dr. Wise, we're coming up, we're going to talk about the barriers to mental health in general, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on obstacles to women exclusively in taking charge of their mental health.
Yeah, I think one of the obstacles that I see in the realm of child treatment in particular is that women are often still the primary caregiving person in any family system for children, and so they're often sort of choosing between their own mental health or maybe services for their child and prioritizing their child or other activities. So I think that's one of the things that we see a lot of.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And now the hard part is how do you change minds? How do you find solutions? Looking for advice for moms out there, for women out there. I'm looking at you, Dr. Price. I'm looking at you, Dr. Wise. Debbie, you feel free here. You've been through hell as well. And any advice we can give folks?
Well, I think just acknowledging that you suffer, and that, but suffering in the sense of mental health is that we have treatment for that. Treatment that really can work. Yeah. But we have to ask for it and we have to reach out for it. But it's there, and there's hope for whomever may be sitting silently and suffering, to let them know there's hope.
We good on that? It sounds like a good exclamation point. There is hope. All right, stick around. The silent struggle continues. Next up, millions of people who need treatment for mental health do not get the treatment they need. Straight ahead, we're going to discuss what's standing in the way of access to mental health care. Stay with us. With you, and now in the silent struggle, as millions of Americans face mental health issues, getting access to care can prove challenging at times. Steve's back to paint the picture about barriers to care. Steve.
According to 2023 numbers, more than half of adults with mental illness do not get treatment. That equates to 28 million people across the country. Let's take a look at this map. This is from a group called Mental Health America, and the ranking shows how much access to mental health care exists within a state. Let's zoom in here to North Carolina. We can tell you we come in at number 39, and that means many, many people here face a number of barriers, including the cost of care. So let's take a closer look at this national data. Nearly a third, 28% of adults with mental illness did not get treatment because of cost. Only 11% of adults, that's more than 5 million people with mental illness, have insurance to pay for it. 60% of young people with major depression do not get mental health treatment, and South Carolina actually ranks the lowest in this category in the entire country, with 8 in 10 young people with depression not getting the care they need. And finally, 160 million people live in an area experiencing a shortage of mental health professionals. Joel.
Some startling numbers from Steve Daniels. Steve, thank you. 28 million adults not receiving the treatment they need. So let's talk about barriers to mental health care. And Mark, look, you've been open about your personal struggles with mental illness, diagnosed at age 13 with bipolar disorder. And there were a lot of barriers on your road to recovery.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as with many people with a serious mental illness, there's about a 10-year road to recovery. And during that 10 years, it was really challenging, a lot of ups and downs. I was uninsured for a period of time, so that really made it difficult to access providers, having to go to the emergency room just to get prescription access to medications. I really didn't know other people. There was a lot of stigma, and I isolated, so I didn't have any people to talk to about it. So I struggled as an adolescent, as a young adult, until an eventual hospitalization. And at that point, I found NAMI. And that's when things started to fall into place for me. I was a participant in their peer-to-peer class, which is an 8-week class taught by peers living in recovery, and gives you the tools to rebuild your life and live successfully. And really everything kind of fell into place after that, and NAMI was really pivotal in getting me connected to the right resources, helping me navigate the insurance, finding providers, and it's a big reason why I'm here today.
Yeah, we're going to spend a little bit of the conversation later talking about resources. I want you to tick through those. I think they can be very helpful to a lot of people. Dr. Price, you see patients, you have a private practice. I know you've worked at public hospitals. You work with the uninsured sometimes. I'm sure you've seen your share of stories about barriers to healthcare and mental health care that people really need.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's very common. I was thinking about if you went into an emergency department now and you had symptoms of heart attack or stroke, someone would see you so very quickly, and they would connect you to specialty care. You'd have follow-up care, all of that. If you go into a hospital with an emergency, with a mental health crisis, you may sit there for days, for an extended period of time, and still not necessarily have the connection to the resources that you need, because it is hard for a lot of our patients that have mental illness. They may not have health insurance, and what's sad is that there are a lot of providers that don't even accept insurance. So even having insurance sometimes is still not enough. And so we really have to think about that and how we can, bridge the gap. But unfortunately, it's considerable. And even if you have insurance, you may be waiting for weeks and months to be seen by someone because there is such a demand right now. And unfortunately, I don't see the cavalry coming anytime soon with having enough psychiatrists, for example, to fill the need. And so we really have to work together as a community to think up real strategies that are going to really help address some of these issues.
Kerwin, let me bring you back into the conversation. I know, look, you grew up a little east of downtown here in a community. You certainly, as a boy and young man, saw your share of crime and violence and beating that, and the story is amazing. But I'm wondering how much your own mental health and overcoming that plays into that story. I mean, you told that story about your 15-year-old friend. Well, you were both 15 at the time,
yes.
and seeing that shooting and the impact that it had on your friend and the impact that it had on you, your barriers to mental health care.
Yeah, I definitely suffered some barriers to mental health and mental health care. You know, of course, coming in and how I grew up, we didn't talk about our mental health status. We didn't address what was going on with us mentally. We experienced trauma and we kept on moving. And so this was unprocessed trauma, which ultimately led me to the lifestyle of saying I wouldn't be caught and be somebody on the other end of violence. And so that ultimately, you know, led to some of my story of what made me who I am today. And so realizing that and seeing that, I know that now the jails and the prisons have become the de facto mental health facilities, right? Because it seems like now, looking at the political environment, it is not a political will to create more change for these individuals and actually invest in these type of services for these individuals. And so you see a heavy influx of people going in and out of the carceral system, just like myself.
Dr. Wise, let me bring you back. A lot of young people are suffering from depression, many of them not getting care. Where's the breakdown?
I think many of the barriers that have been named, it's often hard for the grown-ups in a child's life to recognize the severity of the feelings, the symptoms that a child is experiencing, and to then know how to navigate the system to get them care if there aren't additional barriers like cost, insurance, and again, just a sort of paucity of providers who are available at this time.
Dr. Price, when you stopped, it didn't sound hopeful with the number of psychiatrists and the lack of resources. But I want to end the segment on a positive note with some advice for folks who may be facing barriers, may not have insurance. What do you do?
So I will say one thing that has made me very hopeful recently is with Medicaid expansion in the state. That it really is going to impact, I believe, this very population that we're talking about. Individuals who may not have been able to access mental health care are going to be able to. And so I like the fact that it seems that we are trying to put our brains together a bit more as a community, as leaders, to really try to figure out these complex problems and solutions. So from that perspective, I actually feel quite hopeful.
There it is. Look at that. I knew we could find something to end well on. Millions of people are battling mental health issues and are not letting the mental illness stand in their way. Next, we're going to dive into the resources available and how you can be a part of the bigger fight to shine a light on mental health well-being. Stay with us. We're back with the silent struggle, and we will be loud about solutions. So let us wrap up the conversation talking solutions, all the different avenues to access care. According to numbers from NAMI, in 2021, 47% of adults with mental illness received treatment. 65% of adults with serious mental illness also received treatment. And finally, the average delay between onset of mental illness symptoms and treatment was 11 years. Mark, you talked about that. NAMI has a lot of ways for people impacted by mental illness to find the help they need, and many of those options are absolutely free. I want you to tell us about as many of them as possible.
Yeah, definitely. All of our programs are offered for free. That's what makes this such a great organization. So NAMI Wake County, there's 3 buckets. We provide support, education, and public awareness. So for support, we've got a huge offering of support groups for family members, for individuals with lived experience, for the LGBTQ population, survivors of suicide attempts, stress and anxiety. And so there's a lot of support groups that we offer. From an education standpoint, we've got, I mentioned the class that I took, peer-to-peer, a peer-led recovery class. We've got another 8-week class for family members who are dealing with the new diagnosis, a class for parents of children under the age of 22. And then I'm also a really big proponent of our CIT training, our crisis intervention team. It's a training that we help deliver for first responders and officers on how to de-escalate and keep others safe during responding to a mental health crisis. And then for public awareness, a lot of talk is about combating stigma, and the best way to do that is through the sharing of stories. So we've got a program called In Our Own Voice, where 2 people will share their lived experience to a broad array of different audiences, and then something called Ending the Silence, where we go into middle and high schools to talk to students, teachers, administrators, and parents about mental health. And it's a really important way to kind of combat that stigma. And like I said, it's all offered free of charge.
And Mark, you are not just the executive director, you are also a client, and these programs really made a difference in your life. Kerwin, reps, resources available right now.
So resources we have available right now, we have mentorships for individuals coming home. We have a host of resources from housing to job placement to job readiness to job training. But we have now launched the hotline. And so what's so important about the hotline is it connects them directly with services across the state. And I'm glad to say a couple days ago we had an actual organization called Rebuild call into the hotline and put their resource up there. And what Rebuild do is they connect individuals with therapists for free. For the first 10 sessions, they'll pay for the first 10 sessions for free. It don't matter if you have insurance or not, they'll pay for it for free. Of course, if you have insurance with a copay, so I'm extremely excited about that. So now we can get into the nuts and bolts of addressing those who are just as impacted and just involved with their mental illness and unchecked and untreated trauma.
10 sessions free?
10 sessions. It's a big deal.
Dr. Wise, then Dr. Price, give the folks any advice that you can offer for people watching and wondering what are the first steps to taking care of your mental health.
The thing that I would suggest is most important is talking to people, friends, family, people in faith communities who are going to know about resources that each of us individually can't sort of hold in mind at all times. And knowing that there are so many great resources available, treatment, we have lots and lots of research for little kids and teenagers and grown-ups about treatment that is effective, both types of therapy that have been tested and also psychiatric medication if that's needed additionally. So lots of hope in North Carolina.
Dr. Price?
I want to call out, at least for my 988, we need to say that number, that it's available 24/7 at Crisis
National
Suicide
Crisis Lifeline.
for people who want to maybe get those resources sooner than later for themselves or people that they love. If you do have a primary care physician, that's a great place to start as well. They can often get you connected to mental health services. And there are a lot of interesting models that are designed to try to help get more, get patients connected to mental health services with reducing the stigma, such as the collaborative care model, and where you have psychiatrists who team up with primary care docs and serve as a backup. And so, so it's not just waiting for the psychiatry cavalry, but training providers of all sorts to be able to treat mental health. And again, I just will say it again that if you are suffering, you do not need to continue so, that there are resources. Reach out to those who are around you, however, because sometimes it can be a fight to get the resources that you need. And it's okay to lean on others to help you to get that.
Lots of tools in this toolbox, and lots of folks willing to help you get access to those tools. Mark, I want to end with you because NAMI is hosting a walk. It's in Mooresville. It's this weekend. It's on Saturday. Quickly tell us about it.
Yeah, NAMI Walks, it's our Key Mark fundraising event each year. You can show up 9 o'clock at Perimeter Park in Mooresville. If you just want to show up and show your support, that's great. There's certainly a fundraising component, so you can visit the QR code or the website and to join our team, donate money. All funds raised go directly to our local affiliate to help deliver our programs that I mentioned free of charge. But it's a great event, and again, if you just want to show up and meet other NAMI volunteers, the board, the staff, hope to see everyone there.
It's a great way to open the conversation, open the dialogue. Good luck with it, Mark.
Thank you.
The time is up. We want to once again thank our panel for taking the time to discuss this important topic as we mark Mental Health Awareness Month. There is a wealth of resources that are out there right now. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, Dr. Price mentioned it, it's worth mentioning again. Free, confidential help is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Just call or text that 3-digit number on your screen. That's the National Lifeline at 988. Panel, you guys were great. You guys were great. Thank you so much. Dr. Debbie, thank you for coming as well. And thank you so much for watching The Silent Struggle. I'm Joel Brown. Have a great night.
Yeah.